Hi there, my name is Isaac Jimenez, and this is my practicum presentation. I'll be going over one of the projects that I am the lead developer and pretty much the architect. I was there from the beginning, helping in shaping who the stakeholders are and figuring out what features are needed to help provide a platform in which students in work studies can exchange shifts. So the problem for that we're facing, at least here at North Seattle College, is that in the work study department, there are certain positions that don't really require um, someone to keep working that position so they can, let's say you work in the food court, you're watching and making sure that no one steals any sodas. And there it might be a help desk agent where it's same they're not tied to that position and they want to pick up some hours because their current role doesn't give them more hours. They can use this platform to be able to work for someone else and pick up their shifts. And this is very important because there, if work study students do not work all their hours, that means that they lose some of that funding if they don't exhaust it by the end of the quarter. So it's this platform will help these students who are juggling life in school, which we all know is pretty difficult and it's common in at North Seattle, uh, gives them the ability to continue in their education. Okay, so this is going over the wireframes. There's a couple of new wireframes that we I helped create like this quarter. Like here in the profile page, it was a little bit difficult to kind of create UIs. It's not my most like I'm not very much a UI person. I appreciate like great UI. I personally don't think I can make it look pretty, but all these UIs are functional. And so that's one of the things that I do want to stress is that the way I approach this project is creating just a functional UI, MVP all the time, making sure we get just the minimum viable product out. And and so it's been still a pretty good learning experience to see this kind of come to life by building it just to layouts and small components. Um, okay, and uh, a little bit of last quarter, I worked on creating the database architecture. So this is the ERD. There was some added tables. Let's let me move here. So as you can see, we like when I first started this application, I think I overthought the architecture where you would have an organization that is the owner of departments. So you have maybe the um, let's see, the art or science organization, and they all have just a subset of departments. And I think this organization part is unnecessary for now. And really, it just depends once we get into the beta version of our app, is where the stakeholders will give us feedback whether we do need this organization. And so I ended up slimming it down to just departments. But as you can see, we got your basic like area where you're going to hold user data. And here's where we have all of the shifts and the shift change table, which has a many to many relationship. So this is kind of like the ledger. So when a shift gets added here and then in the shift table, and then if they need a coverage, then it gets placed into the shift change table. And here's where we're going to handle like the data, like who originally owned this shift, who's going to be the one that's picking up. There's a couple missing columns now that I noticed. But once we get into the database files, you'll see the full implementation. And I guess that was another thing that I learned through this project is that, you know, you try to think of every possibility, but at times you can spend too much time thinking and not actually doing. And I think that ended up delaying a little bit of my progress because I was making sure like, oh, we have got to have this table and this data, but it's not until you're actually building do you really like get really close to the problems that ends up arising when you're architecting the or being the architect of this database. I'll go more into that later in this presentation. Okay, so you guys all saw the Shift ERD. Do need to make a little bit of updates, but it's an iterative process, and that's something that you, even though I've only coded for about like 4 or 5 years, it's something that I still have to tell myself, like, it's not going to be perfect the first time. It's just going to take layers of improvement. And I think that's like the best way to approach it. So on top of creating the ERD, I also was responsible for pretty much creating the Docker setup. So the Supabase uh, is the service that holds a lot of the data and the backend information. And then that talks to the uh, application layer, which is Expo. And this file or project is covers all the code. So the front end essentially will be calling these functions from the database, and that's how it's going to make this app alive. I also implemented authentication. So if uh, you can sign up using this right here. Actually, let me test it out here. Let's get this up and running. Start. I also was kind of responsible for creating some of these scripts to make it easier for other developers to run this application locally, and it will help us in our Git action environment. So we can like get snapshots of backup data, and it will help in the development workflow process. Okay. Uh, we need to then run the Expo front end. All right. Here, let's run iOS, not now. So log in. Let's do testing. That's going to be just the name. Or let's do North Seattle College. And we're in the login. So here, sign up. North Seattle College. So essentially what is happening is that there's a Supabase library that gets called by this front end. And when you click on it, it goes and communicates with the back end, which we will see here in a second. But uh, right now, we don't have a lot of the mail authentication. So normally you would get an email with information that you just created to sign up. Click here to make sure that you're not a robot or spam. You're an actual user. But here we're clicking it again. As you can see, uh, user already registered. And we can also log in and it should work. Yeah. And here is the authentication data coming from that end. Um, you can see all the extra detail information. I mean, this won't be visible from the user standpoint, but this at least helps for debugging and getting feedback, whether to understand if the authentication worked. And as you can see, we're also using Expo secure storage where we're saving all the tokens. So if you wanted, you can save the password and it'll remember. Uh, that way you don't have to keep managing all these passwords. Oh my God. It's pretty bad out there. Yeah. I know it's digital hygiene, but it's sometimes it's just so many, like two passwords for here at North Seattle College. And you can't even save them because otherwise just you don't want to be the bad guy who let the bad actors in. Okay, so here's one of the scheduling pages. This was made by one of our top performing developers, Cameron. Oh, yeah, that guy's a beast. Uh, as you can see, right now it's just the UI element. The back end hadn't been fully implemented, so as you can just imagine once the back end is fully done, um, we'll definitely have it ready for at least alpha. And my goal is by the end of the or at least my school year and when I graduate soon over the summer, we should be in beta. Uh, and that's the goal. Okay, this is the UI as you can see. And then let's go to the project. Let's go to the back end. Oh, okay. So here are some of the tables that I was talking about earlier. So Supabase uses Postgres under the hood. So it's like built on top. And so what makes Supabase pretty attractive as a technology is that it handles a lot of authentication because building it from scratch is going to be really difficult and complex. And we can save some time. And there's people that have already, figured out every edge case, over engineered it to the point that it's like almost enterprise ready. Um, and so we can we can use Supabase and just query Postgres uh, directly. And so here you can see all this SQL statements. So these are the positions we can run here to see the data. And then let's go, here's the departments for the tutoring services that they're going to be one of our first users. And when originally this project was kind of geared towards creating a shift exchange app for like the restaurant industry or any uh, local economies and sell it as like platform as a service or a SaaS product. But at least through my time at previous internships, specifically Microsoft and Cyber Mobile, one of the things that got instilled to me at really early time of my career in learning building software for people is that you need to deliver to your subset of users and you have to just make all the features to fit or appease all of their needs because at the end of the day, they're just going to use it and they're going to be advocates for your app. And they'll also be way more engaged in providing feedback to make it even better. And as you start refining the systems and the features that this application can provide to people, then you can start increasing the scope of having multiple users because the issue ends up being if you have multiple users in mind, you can have too many features and where none of those features end up being very well developed or thought out and it doesn't do a good job. And so then your application ends up just doing too much that it didn't need to do. So you always try to get to the core of the problem and provide the environment to provide solutions to the user's pain points. Okay, and here is the user profiles. So here's where we house all of the profiles. One of the cool things that I got to do was create these functions and triggers. Well, some of these codes actually came from a like demo project that I did it in my spare time to better understand Supabase. So a lot of this code kind of came from that project, but like it taught me a lot and it really helped in just internalizing and understanding this new technology. And so I'll go a little bit into details about this. So when as earlier as you saw, we were inputting a new user signing up. And when you sign up, there's an authentication user table. And let's go check that out. Here's going to be the studio. Oh, okay. Normally you can just like click that and then you can just go directly towards the GUI. But looks like that's not going to happen today. Okay. So here's the authentication. Here's the user that we made earlier. And so a user gets added here. Then we have the trigger that is kind of like a listener that ends up invoking this function. And this function ends up inserting from that authentication user to the public profile table, which is right here. And then here we also store whether the user is a supervisor, their positions. We saw the positions table and some of the relevant information. Here's like name and email. We could always change this. We're still developing. So a lot of these properties are not final. Like one of the things that I did that helps me in the development process is the profile int ID because the UUID is like just gibberish, bunch of numbers and letter, while the serial unique ID is just, integers, which is, and it's sequential. So it's just a little bit easier to understand when you're looking at all this data and trying to understand what is going on. Okay, yeah, here's the supervisor tables. Here's where there is a trigger that I made where the profile ID gets placed into the supervisor table. So later on, we can use that supervisor table as a source of truth. Um, and there's going to be fewer users, so you can just easily query that table to check whether this user has supervisor permissions. And the supervisor is the person who allows or authorizes the shift changes. All right. And then here is the shifts table. So one of the cool things about Postgres is that you can add constraints at the database, like table creation. So here, the slot is where we're going to be storing these time Z range. And it contains the beginning and the end of the shift. And as you can see, this is like a morning shift, morning A, and all this other stuff. But if there's a if there's another person, let's say this morning shift B, if these two assigned users want, so one gives it up, and then morning shift A tries to pick up this shift, he can't, just because of the way the table has these constraints. And there's where the constraint occurs is right here. So here it says for the assigned user with slot, or so all the slots that have this assigned user, so it pulls all the shifts. Pretty much right here, this little keyword prevents any overlapping between the shifts. So it would get denied and it would just throw an error. That's why here's the exclude keyword. One other cool thing is that when you're inserting these shifts, um, you the start of the shift can only be in the future. So this can simplify like error handling with the front end, because at the database level, it will not accept bad data. So it keeps the database integrity intact. And there's multiple layers of security checks or validations that I also built in to make sure that it is consistent and atomic. Okay, let's see. I wasn't completely sure if all the there was any data in here. Okay, it looks like it's not. And then here is the shift change management table. And here is where kind of all the magic of being able to swap shifts um, occurs. So as you can see here, we're storing the shift IDs and then the original shift profile ID. So it grabs this value, assigned user, and saves it into that column. And then once that happens, then we also change the needs coverage to true. And that's another way, that's like just a Boolean flag to help us identify and validate whether the shift needs coverage or not. And then that way we can just like have the we can easily query some of the data. Um, and there's other features like we can save the supervisor ID if it's approved or denied, so they know. And there's also custom functions that I built here specifically to handle a lot of this data manipulation. And I really wanted to create a lot of these actions into functions just because it simplifies a lot of the logic and it just reduces a lot of like data validation in the front end. But yeah, that's that's pretty much an overview of all the work that I did. This project has been pretty rewarding just because getting more intimate with SQL now that I have a better idea and some experience on how to architect a database, that means that the possibilities are endless of what I can build. There's no more limitation of, oh, that's a cool UI and it looks nice, but what, you only got static data? It doesn't interact with like the back end. But now I can design the back end, make all the actions. It's not going to look the prettiest, but it's going to work. Worst case, I go and partner up with someone who's really good at UI and just get a new, fresh paint over the app, or hire a UI designer and make it look uh, the best it can be. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching, and y'all have a good night.